Well, welcome everybody. And today, if you didn't hear it at the very beginning, I told the few people that were on before the top of the hour that I I was tempted to consider and did consider canceling this because of the immensity of the subject matter, because of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi's reach to four different continents, um, over 78 years of life, um, prompting, igniting the independence movement in one country, the largest democracy on the face of the globe, uh, and impacting liberation movements everywhere, and doing it from a spiritual base, doing it from a foundation of practices and rituals and commitments that are commendable and exemplary to this very day. So we're looking at Gandhi, whose very name is contained in the title for this series, Great Souls, Great Prayers. Mahatma, many people think, was his first name. That was a title given to him by Rabindranath Tagore, and I'll explain when that happened later on in the session. Gandhi was born in 1869, October the 2nd, by the way, if you're marking on a hagiography. If you keep a calendar of sacred days of sacred folks, October the 2nd, 1869 was his birthday. He would die on January the 30th, 1948, at the hands of an assassin after just having done his prayer times. Next slide, please. On his 70th birthday, in the middle of World War II, Einstein said these words: "Generations to come, it may be, will scarce believe that such a one as this, ever in flesh and blood, walked upon this earth." And Richard Attenborough, who did the Gandhi movie of great renown, would choose to use this quotation during the funeral processional time at the very beginning of the movie. It is a remarkable quote about a remarkable man, and that's who we're looking at today. He is known by several names, appellations, if you will, titles, affectionate regard. Those of you who've seen newsreels and or the movie Gandhi will note that he was called Mohan. And Mohan was like short, like if you said Jonathan and you shortened it to John, Mohandas is shortened to Mohan, and that's what he was called by family. Gandhi Ji is an affectionate term for him, lovingly given by people in India and people who follow him as an exemplar. It would be kind of like Bob or Bobby, or as one person, a friend of mine in California, called me Babo. It was an affectionate regard. Bapu is father, and Gandhi is understood to be both Washington and Lincoln. As they were to our country, so he was to India. And Bapu, among his intimates, as well as in the country at large, he was called Bapu frequently, and it means father. Mahatma is the word that Rabindranath Tagore gave to him when Gandhi came back from South Africa. And I'm going to do a little bit of just timeline right now. I'm going to go very fast and tell you at what age he was doing what. And we'll get to the point where Tagore gives him the title of great soul. And that's what Mahatma means. It means great soul. Gandhi was married at the age of 15 in an arranged marriage very, very traditional in Indian society at that time. In 1883, to a girl who was 13. They would have and also lose their first child when he was 15, and then the first of 4 sons at the age of 19. At the age of 24, after having achieved a law degree from Cambridge in London or in England, he would agree to a 1-year contract to go to Durban, South Africa, and become a lawyer there. A little bit more than a year later, not even a year later, 1 month later, after he arrives in Durban, he's thrown off of a train for having purchased and sat in a first-class booth or cabin on the train, which was forbidden in the racist regime of South Africa at that time. By the way, it wasn't as bad as apartheid had not been finally codified into law when he was there, but it would be eventually. The apartheid system of dividing people into colored, so-called colored, African, etc. But Gandhi was immediately, at the ripe age of 24, always, to use John Lewis's words, making good trouble. He founded the Indian National Congress in South Africa a year later at the age of 25. At the age of 30, he organizes in the Boer War the Indian Army Ambulance Corps. And you'll see a picture of him in a military uniform, and that's when he is volunteering to be a good citizen, always to abide by the law, those laws that were good and righteous, and also to get the place of Indians rightfully in South African society. He will establish the first of what eventually will become an ashram, but it's really not an ashram at this time. It's called the Phoenix Settlement. And it's an experiment in communal living. He will begin to do that. He will do one called the Phoenix Settlement, and then he will create another ashram with the help of a Dutch volunteer later on as well. He wanted to stay in South Africa 1 year, and he stayed 20 years. And he established, going back and forth between India and South Africa, this huge reputation of somebody who is championing the rights of Indians and their own self-determination. At the age of 38, he will be arrested for the very first time. Right after, he will coin a word called Satyagraha, and we'll come to this a little bit later. Satyagraha means truth force. It also means a kind of campaign event or a commitment. It's a neologism that he created, and it's usually translated as truth force. I heard it during my freshman year in college when I really began to pay attention to Gandhi. I think, like many of us, I'd heard of Gandhi growing up, but really didn't delve into it too much. But heard about Satyagraha during my freshman year at college at TCU. Satyagraha will become extremely important, not only in South Africa, but in India. In 1913, after one of his several trips to prison, he will begin appearing only in a loincloth. On this slide, you see the picture of him as a dandy, right? On the lower left corner, where he's in a nice suit. That's how he went to South Africa. That's how he presented himself at the Indian National Congress. That's how he would, try to portray himself. The picture on the upper right is where he would make visits back to India. And something similar to that is how he presented himself when he moved back to India. He moves back to India in 1915, and all he will wear usually is a wrap or a kind of a shawl, but under that, a loincloth, identifying himself with the poorest of the poor for the rest of his life. It is when he comes home from South Africa that Rabindranath Tagore gives him the title Mahatma. Well, you need to know who Tagore is too. There are some pictures. I should have put a picture of Tagore up. They were good buddies, these two, and he was kind of almost a spiritual director for Gandhi. He would become, Tagore would, the very first Nobel laureate selected from South Asia. His poetry is astoundingly beautiful, and he was a polymath genius, and even has in the Bengal area of India a shrine, a home, a school, and a kind of a following even to this day. Tagore is the one who wrote both the national anthem of India and the national anthem of Pakistan. If you look at him sometimes when he has these piercing eyes and the flowing, beautiful beard, and he looks like an Indian version of Rasputin. He's just very striking. But here he is in his pensiveness, beautiful, beautiful picture. In 1927, he will pen his autobiography called My Experiments with Truth. And it will become renowned and a big, big bestseller. 3 years later, at the age of 60, or 2.5 years later, at the age of 60, he will begin the Salt March. And this is dramatically portrayed in the movie Gandhi when Walker, I think he's a New York Times or New York Post writer, is visiting him at his home by the seaside. And Gandhi is just pensively looking about and just thinking to himself very quietly. And then he just perks up. And he perks up and he goes, "Oh, you've got an idea," Walker says. "You've got an idea, don't you?" And he says, "Well, it would be a shame to have you come all this way to America and not have you find something," or something to that effect. And so he conceives of the Salt March, that he will go on a march of 248 miles and go to the sea and make salt in defiance of the British prohibition of doing that, because they wanted to tax all the salt. And it was a way for them to have a revenue stream. But this would be one of the major confrontations that Gandhi would have with the British Empire to bring them to their knees and have them leave. Like almost everybody else in America, Gandhi retires. He retires from politics at the age, guess what? 65. He doesn't have a Social Security plan. He's still living in an ashram, but he retires from politics at 65. And thereafter, he will begin one fast after another, not continuously, but he will do it strategically. On a couple of occasions, he will announce, "I will fast to my death unless this violence between, say, Muslims and Hindus stops, unless the government does this." He went on many fasts until he injured his health to the extent that they released him so that he wouldn't die under their control or in their hands, and then they'd have a political nightmare on their hands. The British Empire would. He begins at the age of 72 a Quit India program, meaning for the British to leave India. You need to quit India. You need to get out now. I'm saying all these dates and times to show you this is in contradistinction to Martin Luther King, who at the age of 39 was assassinated, right? we're not doing King during this time, but you know his biography. And he died at the age of 39 on the Lorraine Motel balcony from the sniper's bullet. And I often ask myself, especially when I turn 39, well, what have I accomplished? What have I done? Well, let's ask a new question now. Personally, spiritually, developmentally, what will you have done by the time you're 60? What will you do by the time you're 70? What will you do by the time you're 72? Because Gandhi kept on doing things, and some of the most momentous and world-changing happened in his later life. India will gain independence in 1947. And thereafter, in that division of Pakistan and India, he will have one more of his fasts. We'll play a clip from a movie that happens during that time. And on January the 30th, after the fast is concluded and the violence has subsided, during his daily prayer round, he will be killed on the grounds of his ashram. His last words were, "Oh God," and they're portrayed in the movie rather accurately. It's "Hey Rama, Hey Rama, Hey Rama, oh God, oh God, oh God." And they're part of a ritualistic prayer. I want to ask, what made Gandhi Gandhi? And these 7 principles, I think, are pretty much, or dynamics, are what really catapulted Gandhi to premier status as a great soul. You can never forget that he was absolutely beloved by his family. He was the favorite. He was treated exceedingly nice. By the way, he was born into the business class, not the top, not the Brahmin, but the next down, the business class in Indian society. And those of you who could, please do get a copy of Isabel Wilkerson's book called Caste. It is one of the best books that's come out in the last 12 months, and it delineates the caste in India and also in the United States, and does comparisons. He was beloved by his family. He was trained as a lawyer. He wasn't a really great student to begin with in India, but he became a very good student, and he studied hard and read diligently when he was in London, and he was a kind of indefatigable lawyer in South Africa. He was schooled in the classics of Western literature. We'll see a slide very shortly about his 3 favorite influences in terms of modernity, Tolstoy being one of them, Ruskin being another, and an Indian poet. He was steeped in political theory and practice. He really studied hard what would work, what was practical. He made mistakes along the way, but he was steeped in those important aspects of leadership. He was undergirded by Hindu rituals and traditions. He observed them almost all of his life, but he was also acquainted with all kinds of religious practices and spiritual disciplines. When Howard Thurman and his wife, Sue Bailey Thurman, visited him, Gandhi asked the Thurmans if they would sing "Were You There?" The great spiritual, because he said it encapsulates the yearnings of the poor and those who are oppressed as good as anything he had ever heard. But he saw the words, but he wanted to hear them sing it. And then they sang it for him. He had favorite hymns, "Lead Kindly Light," and I think "Beneath the Cross of Jesus" were some of his favorite hymns. But another thing was, he was a man who met the moment. A world was hoping and yearning and starving for freedom, not only in India, but in South Africa and in the United States. It was Gandhi who also said to the Thurmans, perhaps it will be through the American Negro, that was his words at that time, that the practices of nonviolence would be brought to the United States. And lo and behold, they were. I put these pictures up because I think what we see about Gandhi are all the pictures of him in a loincloth and with he's got missing teeth and he's got a toothless grin and or he's so earnest, and you need to see the full array of his life. Here he is as a baby in the upper left. Here he is as a young boy. Here he is with his brother. Then as a student in London. Then as an South African lawyer. There is a ambulance corps worker and part of the ambulance corps. Here again, this is on a visit, and I didn't do that slide right. This is when he's in England, the lower left-hand corner. This right here with Kasturbai in the middle and his four sons, I believe this is right after he's come back from South Africa. And there's the South Africa Mohandas K. Gandhi attorney sign. This is his law office in South Africa. I just thought you should see that. I thought you should see the younger pictures of Gandhi. This is his ashram. This was the main ashram in India, where he would do daily prayers. The person who's sitting at a little desk there against the wall, that would be frequently where Gandhi would receive visitors. And we will see a picture 2 slides from now that shows his possessions, and one of them is his stopwatch or his watch, his pocket watch. He would have appointments with people, and he was meticulous about timekeeping. He would say, well, we have 20 minutes to talk. Let's go. Very intentional, focused. You didn't want to waste time. And he lived very punctually. On the grounds of this ashram is this huge statue of him in a kind of meditative pose. And lots of pictures of this you'll see. And you can visit the ashram, by the way. One day I think a couple of weeks ago, I said nobody would go with me to India, and Brent volunteered. And then they got COVID out the yin yang. So I don't think we're going in 2022, and I don't know if we're going to go in 2023, but maybe we'll get a hold of the Rhodes Scholar people and go in 2024. It would be something to go to this ashram. When he died, these were Gandhi's possessions. 2 bowls, one for drinking, one for eating. His holy scriptures, I think that's the Bhagavad Gita. His pocket watch, his glasses, a bowl for burning incense, a letter opener, and 2 pairs of shoes. One, I think, for walking around in the house, kind of clean wooden sandals, and one for being walking on the road. Whenever you see him walking, and he's a walker, he walks 79,000 kilometers during his lifetimes. Equal to, I calculated this up, just a minute, let me get you. This is equal to 2 times around the world. That's how much he walks. 79,000 kilometers, or approximately 18 kilometers a day. When you see news clips, and you'll see one of him in England, you remember, Donna Clark, you've been to England, I know, and others have been to England. And you've been there in, let's say, winter. It's kind of cold and damp, isn't it? Well, there he is with his sandals, walking, and his loincloth, going everywhere, not being pretentious, not needing a coat, wanting to walk. If you want to start with regard to books, you can read his autobiography, which is absolutely wonderful. But remember, it only goes up to 1927. It will not entail all of the stuff that he does thereafter towards Indian independence. The book called Prayer, which is hard to get a hold of, but you can get it on ABE Books, American Book Exchange Books. You can get a copy there. Are collections of prayers that Gandhi gathered from all kinds of resources and sources and origins. and put them together. And then he would use those kinds of prayers at his ashram twice a day, morning and late afternoon, during their ritualistic prayer times. Eric Erickson has an extraordinary book on nonviolence, Gandhi's Truth. 2013, Arvind Sharma produced Gandhi, a spiritual biography. It's one of the best kind of views of Gandhi. I highly recommend it. If you want to look at a really, really contemporary view, I think Gandhi Before India is 2016. And then Gandhi, The Years That Changed the World, the second volume by Ramachandra Guha. It's 900 pages long, by the way, the second volume. It was always a 2-volume set. That was, I think, 2019. I could be wrong about that date. But these are, if you want to enter into the kind of the inscripted telling of Gandhi's story, these are good places to start. But you can also look at video resources, which are on the next slide. And Brent will make available this slide deck if you want it. And you can just get it off of the slide deck. The Dying for Freedom is a wonderful documentary. It's about 45 minutes long. The tour of the Gandhi Ashram is about 8 minutes long. The newsreel excerpts, there's lots of newsreel excerpts. You can look that up on Google. There's a wonderful little video, very brief, I think 4 minutes long, about how Gandhi became Mahatma. And then, of course, Gandhi the movie. I own a copy of Gandhi. I'll loan it to anybody, but you have to give me really valuable collateral. But you can borrow it anytime. And I watch it at least once a year with a good cup of coffee and some Kleenex nearby, because it is so absolutely moving. You may also want to explore Gandhi's influences. And he said, as I've mentioned already in this presentation, that among the modern influences in his life were Tolstoy's The Kingdom of God is Within You. And he carried on a correspondence with Tolstoy and wondered about communal living and what were the principles. And, you know, Tolstoy lived in a kind of a commune. He wanted to know what they were practicing and how they did things. And then John Ruskin also was very, very influential on Gandhi and inspiring to him. And then, as I said, Srimad Rajchandra, a poet in India. And these were modern influences on him as well. Very quickly, I want to go through these three principles, or three dynamics, I think. Among Gandhi's lastingly important religious distinctives are his abiding commitments to certain ideals and what I call spiritual fidelities. Number one is Satyagraha. As I said, Satyagraha means truth force. By the way, Philip Glass wrote a opera called Satyagraha. There's a movie that you can get made out of Bollywood on Satyagraha, Democracy Under Fire. But I think it is maybe Gandhi's grandest intellectual bequest in the evolution of human thought, this thing called Satyagraha. Gandhi is unlike Thurman and unlike Mary Oliver in that he has original thoughts, but what he's great at, what he's absolutely profound at, is seeing the kernel in something and making it writ large. So, for example, he was asked one time, what did he think of Western civilization? I think this is when he was in London on a tour, and he says, "Oh, I think that would be a good idea." So it had never been really actualized, all the tenets of Western civilization. Many people, when they view the word, a friend of mine, a seminary professor, after viewing Gandhi 3 times in 1 week when it first came out, said this was a depiction of the closest embodiment of Jesus's spirit that he had ever witnessed. And it was a movie, for God's sake. Not even in the New Testament did he get the essence of what Jesus was as much as it was in Gandhi's life. And Satyagraha is this creation he has, a neologism, if you will, whereby he's creating something, but he's taking from a lot of different sources, and he creates this thing called truth force. There will be people who will follow him, and they will be called, by the way, Satyagrahis, people who follow in that way. Now, ahimsa means nonviolence. And I'm not sure that I know if I'm saying this right. This is where I want to say, this is why I almost canceled this session. I am very much somebody who's doing this out of the love for the subject matter. Therefore, that's the true definition of an amateur. I'm an amateur. I'm not a historical scholar. I'm not a Gandhi expert. I'm somebody who's been captured by this man's life and his writings, his witness, and cannot let go. Ahimsa may be one way, it may be ahimsa, but it means nonviolence. And it means nonviolent non-cooperation, and frequently would entail civil disobedience. It is very parallel to what Schweitzer founded, created, and lived his life by, which was reverence for life. Huh? Have you heard that term, reverence for life? That's how Schweitzer defined his foundational principle in all of life. He wouldn't kill ants in his village. He wouldn't swat a fly. And Gandhi was very much similar to that. By the way, Gandhi believed in reincarnation. He never did eschew that tenet of his background and his development. But ahimsa is nonviolence. It is the one thing that is brought back by Thurman and then practiced by people like James Lawson, C.T. Vivian, John Lewis. These are this commitment to nonviolence as a way of absolute, surefire social change. Then lastly, no one is untouchable. This attacks and is a broadside against the caste system of India. When Gandhi comes back from South Africa, he's absolutely committed to treating everybody as what he called Harijan, which means in Hindi, child of God. Everybody is Harijan. He will even found a journal with that title, Harijan, child of God. Everybody is a child of God. Read Isabel Wilkerson's book about the ravages of the caste system and how radical Gandhi is in terms of challenging that. So those are 3 distinctives I think that we need to remember Gandhi by. Well, enough of me. Why don't we listen to Gandhi himself and witness him?
Well, hello, Mac.
How are you today?
See you.
Boy, I haven't seen you since I was city. Boy, it looks
right.
good to see an old friend. Say, is Mahatma here, here today?
Yes, he's here today.
Well, look, how do you think his chances? Is there any chance of getting a little talking picture of him? We've got all our sound equipment.
Talking picture?
Yeah, get all the sound equipment right here in the truck. Bring the stuff in, Anthony. Right in here. Hurry up and unload it now.
You want a talkie of him?
Yeah, we want to get a talkie of him.
Well, Mr. Gandhi is one of the most difficult subjects in the world for talking. He has a very feeble voice. And moreover, he has a very deep prejudice against being photographed at all. If England does not grant your demands, what course of action will you follow then?
Of course, civil disobedience and all other phases of Satyagraha are always at our disposal, but whether we shall resort to this weapon immediately or what other steps we shall take, I cannot judge at present.
If England grants your demands, Mr. Gandhi, do you intend to have complete prohibition in the new Indian state?
Oh, yes.
Absolute prohibition?
Absolute.
And do you intend also, if India wins its independence, to abolish child marriages?
I should very much like to, even before.
Do you expect England this time will give India full self-government?
That also is more than I can say.
But you are hopeful.
I am an optimist.
You are an optimist. If you go to the second round table conference, will you go attired in native Indian dress or will you prefer European dress?
I shall certainly not be found in European dress. And if the weather permitted, I should present myself exactly as I am today.
Yes. And if the King of England invited you to dinner at Buckingham Palace, you would go in your customary Indian dress?
In any other dress, I should be most discourteous to him, because I should be artificial.
If England does not grant your demand, are you prepared to return to jail again?
I am always prepared to return to jail.
Would you be prepared to die in the cause of India's independence?
It is a bad question.
But this one I thought was very good to include because of the stupid questions the guy asked. He should know Gandhi well enough that this was a commitment, his dress from 1913. He's not going to change that. That's a supercilious question. Secondly, when he says, "Are you prepared to die?" he says, "It's a very bad question." I loved his sense of humor about this. And Gandhi is not just earnest. He was very earnest. Make no mistake about it. He's very earnest. But he also had a good sense of humor about him. This next one, there's very little humor. There's no humor in this next clip. And it is from the movie right after extraordinary bloodshed between Muslims and Hindus has occurred. And I think it's Calcutta that may not be it, but he goes, Gandhi goes, encamps in the middle of this situation where the tension is and says, "I am going to fast until I die unless you stop this." And this is a scene there that's very famous. Those of you who've seen this, I view that as one of the most holy moments of any film I've ever seen. It's a beautiful portrayal. I think, by the way, it's an amalgam of several instances like that that Attenborough put together in one moment to show Gandhi's spirit, and also that it shows how Gandhi lived out these adages: an eye for an eye only ends up making the whole world blind. Happiness really is when what you think and what you say and what you do are in harmony. And obviously the man who had killed a child and whose child had been killed, he was out of harmony, he was not happy, he was tragically broken. And also the weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong. And he believed in that, he believed in forgiveness, and he lived it out. And he showed in that moment how that man could do it. I know a way out of hell. Find a child and take him as your own, a Muslim child, and raise him as a Muslim. How many of us could be inspired to do something along those lines to make the world a better place and to contribute to a lot of people getting out of hell, the hellish experience that they have on earth? I'm going to go a little bit controversial. I'm going to go rather quickly because I don't want to dwell on this. This is a scene of Gandhi speaking, and you see the hordes and hordes and hordes of people. That, you know, he was a phenomenon. Hordes and hordes of people don't necessarily mean good things are happening, however. In Gandhi's situation, it meant for the liberation of India. It meant for the overcoming of domination, which the British Empire had done, overcoming of the caste system, although that was so ingrained in Indian society that it wasn't immediately overcome. But the next slide is something that is pretty arresting. When I found that slide of Gandhi speaking before thousands, this was the next slide on the feed. And this is a slide, a photograph of a rally in Madison Square Garden in 1939 of the German Bund in support of Adolf Hitler. This happened in our country, in New York City, in February of 1939. And so that leads me to ask the question, next slide, please, and I'm going to go very quickly. I don't want to, this is not to make it too political, but to say, is Gandhi relevant in America? Could we ask that question? In the upper left-hand side of your screen is a march from New York, the state of New York, in the 1920s. The picture of the American flag and the Nazi flag is from 1937 in the United States. The picture down on the lower left-hand side, both the poster and the picture of Washington in that huge hall of Madison Square Garden, that's the 1939 gathering of the German Bund. Up in your right-hand corner is Charlottesville, where neo-Nazis and people brandishing Confederate flags would shout the words, "Jews will not replace us. Jews will not replace us." And then the lower right hand is from January the 6th, when Confederate flags were brandished as people stormed the US Capitol. Gandhi's life, I believe, is relevant. His spiritual practices are useful and are applicable to this day. Gandhi's hope-filled premier ideal is summed up in this quote, I believe, and this is Gandhi on the way to the end of the Salt March. It seemed like a fitting photograph to go with this quote. "When I despair, I remember that all through history, the way of truth and love has always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they seem invincible. But in the end, they always fall. Think of it, always. And I take great hope from that. I do this as a complete amateur for love of what Gandhi stood for and his life of witness and great, great impact. And just to repeat, there are very few individuals that have had an impact on 4 continents: Europe, India, or South Asia, Africa, and the United States. And I had not put that together until preparation for this presentation to say, my goodness, you can kind of discount Antarctica, right? Unless you're talking about climate change. That's the 6th continent. But, and I would assume someplace in South America on that continent, there's also kind of evidence of his impact. But 4 of them, I know for sure, there's been an impact. Unbelievable. I like that it was Gandhi. I mean, it was Thurman who sought out Gandhi.
Yeah.
Gandhi was so focused on the liberation of Indian people and so caught up. I mean, and Thurman was not unlike that in that he was, when he writes to Mordecai Wyatt Johnson, he writes a letter when he's like 17. Unbelievable. And he says, "My people need me," which becomes the title of the first first book of his collected papers, is called "My People Need Me." Who at the age of 17 says that?
Yeah.
Except Howard Thurman. And it would be Thurman that initiated through the student, I think it's called the Christian Student Movement or the Student Christian Movement, not unlike the YMCA, that he gets appointed and gets sent as an emissary to India for this. So they're trying to learn from Gandhi and trying to also be good ambassadors and present. Thurman has some moments of irritation in not wanting to do a dog and pony show for the Indians. He wants authentic connection, and he gets it with Gandhi. I think he really resisted a little bit singing that song for him. He didn't want to perform for Gandhi, but Gandhi compelled him with his authentic admiration for the song, and there's also his respect for the Thurmans. So they did sing it. Were you there? And then they brought those stories back to the United States.
Do you think that ability of these amazing men to be able to respect and participate in so many different types of religious practices helps to keep them from narrowing down their aspect of who God is, and that might be a religious practice that's a good idea?
Just take the question mark off your statement. There's no question there. You've made a statement. Yes, yes. It makes them open. It keeps them, Mary Oliver, just to repeat one thing that we said, what prayer was. Prayer is a silence. It's a door that you go through in order for another voice to speak. And Thurman goes and puts himself at Gandhi's disposal. Gandhi, reading the Upanishads, reading the Bhagavad Gita, reading the New Testament, reading the Hebrew Bible, reading. He is always trying to be open. He said at one point, and I don't have the quoted down exactly, that what he was trying to do is meet God face to face. And so most of his spiritual, religious endeavors to broaden his horizon are in service of that ideal and that hope. And I think, he finally, one of the things we haven't talked about too much, but all 4 of the people that we've examined, even Mary Oliver, although it's not real clear, they have an almost insatiable curiosity about the world and are seeking to find out more. If somebody will not have dialogue with you, they just won't. And you say, well, another time, I'm open. here's my card, here's my number, and we can talk. I'd like to try to understand why you carry a Nazi flag. Tell me, out of what pain is that born? What fear or dynamic within your soul moves you to do that? And would you be open to hearing how that impacts my soul and the soul of people I cherish and find precious? If they won't be open to that, then no dialogue can happen. And then we hope that we have guardrails up enough so that people that are like that will not commit murder and will not do evil. There's a moment in the movie Gandhi where the viceroy or somebody says, do you just expect that the British will just leave? And he goes, yes, I do. You will just leave. After a while, you will see that you cannot control us and you will just depart. You will, and that is exactly what happened. The bloodshed was plentiful before then, but the bloodshed would come at the ethnic tension between the Muslims and the Hindus and the partition of Bangladesh and Pakistan and India. That 500,000 people were killed during that partition.
Bob, one of the favorite quotes I have from Gandhi is, if you don't see God in the next person you meet, there's no need looking any further. And what a challenging task that is,
Yes.
To see the divine in everyone, but I mean, that was his holiness that he could do that, in my opinion.
He did it so consistently, so disciplined.
He never failed to see God in the other.
It's the no one is untouchable.
Right.
No one, everybody is Hadi John.